Welcome to the ATX Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Riley. The ATX Podcast is an interview show with noteworthy Austinites about their lives, their work, and their city. In this episode, I interview Ellen Jefferson, Executive Director of Austin Pets Alive. During our conversation, Ellen talks about the genesis of Austin Pets Alive, its assistance in making Austin America's largest no-kill city, and her hopes for the future of the organization. Ellen, thank you for joining the show. It's good to have you here and welcome on.
Thanks so much. I'm glad to be here.
Same here. So I wanted to start just by, before we kind of dive into Austin Pets Alive specifically, just to talk about your specific background and what led you to the APA. And I know you're a veterinarian by training. What is that general genesis from the standard path of being a veterinarian to coming to Austin and kickstarting Austin Pets Alive?
Well, that's a good question. I never intended to be a shelter veterinarian or to work in shelters. As going into vet school, I knew that I wanted to make an impact on animals, and I wanted to help the neediest animals. But I really thought that the only way I could do that was by being a veterinarian in private practice. So that was my entire schooling. And then when I graduated, working in private practice, and moved here a year after I graduated and was working in an emergency room. And I had a ton of time on my hands because I only had to work 3 nights a week because the hours are so long. Right. And my sister was like, well, why don't you go volunteer at the shelter? Because you love the shelter. And so I went down to our city shelter, which is now where Austin Pets Alive is, and started volunteering and trying to help them with things. And at that time in Austin had a 15% save rate.
Yeah.
So the animals that only 15% of the animals were leaving alive, and it really didn't have anything to do with their medical status or their broken legs or anything. So what I was trying to bring to the table to offer to help them get out alive really wasn't the core problem. Yeah. And so I didn't feel like I was really making a big, the best use of my time. And so that led me to really, because they were taking in 25,000 animals and only getting about 15% out alive. So that was a huge number every day that were being killed. And when you see it in person, it is much different than reading about it. And so I felt like I had to do something, and I didn't think I could affect anything in the shelter. So I started a spay and neuter clinic to try to get the public to get more of their animals fixed. So fewer would be born, and then fewer would end up in the shelter, and more could make it out alive because it'd be a smaller number total coming in. And I did that for about 9 years. And I do believe that it helps a lot of animals and a lot of people, and the shelter too. But it wasn't the kind of impact I was expecting. I was expecting after 9 years that we would be a no-kill city because of all that work that we were putting into the community. And so in about 2007, 2008, there was a lot of community talk about how do we save more animal lives. And that's when it kind of dawned on me that somebody just has to start saving them. And so Austin Pets Alive was an organization that was here. They were doing advocacy work, and they wanted a new volunteer executive director. So I said, hey, I don't mind doing that. Why don't we just see if we can maybe make an impact? Right. And that started the whole thing.
And the prior to you joining the Austin Pets Alive, the Spade initiative that you were involved, was that Emancipet?
Yes.
Was that okay? That was the program you were associated with at that time.
Yeah, I founded Emancipet, and now they're doing great work, and they're continuing to help the community in huge ways. And so that's great. It's in great hands.
Yeah. The 15% kill rate that you mentioned earlier, is that typical of standard American cities? Where does that rank in terms of what is generally expected in U.S. cities now?
Well, there is a push to get every city to 90% save rate or 90% leaving alive. And that is far from the reality, unfortunately. 15% is pretty bad nowadays. But we just had a meeting of our American Pets Alive group that helps other communities try to achieve what Austin's achieved. Yeah. And we were talking about a community in Texas that has 2% save rate for cats. So there's a lot of places in Texas that are not doing well.
You mentioned the huge difference between reading about that statistic and actually being there, I assume, and seeing it or being a component of that process. If you're comfortable talking about that, what was that experience like for you to actually see the statistics in action or witness what I think to any, most Americans would seem to be just a terribly sad act consistently day in and day out.
And, I wasn't there every day.
Yeah.
So I had snapshots whenever I was able to volunteer, and I still had my job. So what I would see was more as a volunteer vet, not actually part of the process of euthanasia.
I see.
So the things that stick out in my memory are me helping to try to do spays and neuters and having the animals come in for spay neuter. And we had a table we were doing them all on as kind of an assembly line process. And then the shelter was being renovated at the time, which is hard to believe if you look at it now, but it was being renovated. And it, on the table next to me is where they were doing the euthanasias, because the euthanasia room was closed because of the renovation. So while I'm doing all these surgeries and trying to make a positive impact, the next table to me is euthanizing faster than I can even spay an animal.
Yeah.
So that was kind of mind boggling. And, it was puppies, it was mothers of puppies, it was animals that would never die in this city nowadays. Right. And it was sort of horrifying. I bet.
Is that done painlessly? I mean, I know that still happens periodically, even in Austin, I understand, but how does that process work for people who are just not familiar with the reality and the gory details of what happens?
Well, So this is sort of one of the great fallacies and very controversial subjects in the animal sheltering world, is that euthanasia, it sounds like a humane, painless death, but it's often not for the animals that are experiencing it. A lot of the animals that are coming in, you have to be really good at finding a vein to get the drugs in. And most shelters don't place catheters. Like if you think about prisons and the execution that happens now, it's all through catheter. Everything's tested 1 million times before they do the actual drug. Yeah. That doesn't happen in animals. Sure. It's just a stick and then try to get the drug into them. And the drug is very caustic, and so it causes a lot of tissue death wherever it doesn't go in the vein. And a lot of the animals are in a very fearful state because they don't know what's going on, but they know something's happening. Yeah. And sometimes it's feral cats that are never going to behave well enough for you to be able to hit a vein. Yeah. So it is not a kind death for most animals.
Yeah. Yeah. Incredible. Painting the picture from that time to now, I guess before I move on to that, those animals that end up in shelters generally that historically were euthanized, is there a way to know what their genesis story is, how they generally get to that place to begin with, and what their animal life stories are generally?
The short answer is no, but the longer answer is we really want to know that, especially for the ones that don't have an easy outcome. So we have a lot of, probably the majority of the animals that come into the shelter nowadays can easily be adopted back into the community. Yeah. So they have a very fast stay at the shelter. The animals that come in that are much harder to move into the community as adoptees, those we want to know more. Is there something in the community that's happening that's creating behavior problems or medical problems that we could maybe start addressing at the front end? Sure. And it's not necessarily because there's too many of them, because many of them are coming into the city shelter a year old, 7 years old. Mm-hmm. So they've been in somebody's home. They were wanted at some point, but then something's happened to either break the bond or where they've caused a big enough problem that they are no longer welcome there. Yeah. And there has got to be some commonality about that. It's just we have no intel. This industry has almost zero research around things like that it could help move the needle.
And these are animals generally or almost exclusively that are brought in by known individuals, or are they dropped off at the door? How do the animals come in? And
I don't know the current statistic at Austin Animal Center. We pull from other shelters. Yeah. So we're sort of the second shelter most of these animals are in. The Austin Animal Center is the shelter where we're trying to make the impact because they're the safety net for the community. Mm-hmm. And that's where the live release is calculated at and all of that. Mm-hmm. The animals that come in, it used to be about 50-50 over the counter and in the field.
Okay.
And then there's another way to look at them, whether they're stray animals or owner surrender. And that's they're kind of mixed between the method and the reason that they're brought in. And that's another place that we need to do more research on.
I gotcha. And given the success of Austin's rates right now, I'd be curious to just get the most up-to-date information on how Austin is doing generally as a city. I know it's been, I don't know if it's given awards, but it's consistently named, I believe, the largest American city for being a no-kill area or place of residence. Is that still the case? And what do you attribute that to?
Austin is doing very well compared to the rest of the country. And it has been going on for about 8 years. We're about to celebrate the 8th anniversary of no kill in Austin. The reason that I'm not happy about that is that other communities should have caught up with us by now. Yeah. It's pretty sad to think that we're still holding this moniker, but it's good for Austin. And Austin, when we started the no-kill movement in Austin in 2007, 2008, the Animal Advisory Commission was charged by council to create a goal for the city to try to reach. And that would become what they're now calling the 90% resolution. And that was just a guess. Nobody really knew where we start saving all these lives. You don't really know how many are not savable. Now Austin is at about 98%, and there are maybe 5 cities in America that reach over 95%, 94%. So it is heads and shoulders above the rest of the world.
Were there city ordinances that were put in place that also allowed that to facilitate itself and become so successful? I mean, why is it that this city, beyond the other big American cities, has been able to be so successful in that area?
I think that it is a combination of advocates. It's a combination of partnerships between Austin Animal Center and Austin Pets Alive to get the animals out through a live path. And I think that there were other organizations that were really focused on the politics of this, and they were so smart. It was, I didn't really recognize the value of that back then, but what they have done is create this council that actually cares about this issue. They're knowledgeable about this issue. They're proud of it. They want this to continue. And that really kind of changes the whole conversation about what's happening on the ground, whether it's at the city shelter among staff or even in nonprofits. Like there's a certain bar that everybody expects Austin to be at, which is fantastic. And that was 90%. Council member Poole put forward a resolution that earlier this year and changed it to 95%. Wow. So now Austin's minimum bar is 95%, which is fascinating.
I mentioned this to you before we started recording. I moved here about 1.5 years ago, and it's undeniable that one of the first noticeable things about Austin is how happy people are with their dogs and how many dogs there are just simply everywhere. And they seem to be just a part of the community. Is that board or committee that you were just mentioning, did they have a role in creating a community or a business community that was more amenable to having pets outdoors within the premises of small business in Austin? Are there like specific alterations that were made to the city code or to city businesses that have really helped in the no-kill awards that Austin has received?
I don't know the answer to that fully. Yeah. There are some animal codes, but I don't think that they discuss that in particular. I think when I moved here 20 years ago, that's one of the reasons I moved here is everybody was outside with their dog. It seemed like a huge animal-friendly town. And then I found out what was happening in the shelter. So it's interesting how the community didn't reflect what was actually occurring in the shelter. But I think when the light was shined on what was happening, the community really wanted that to change. And that I don't think it's remarkable. I think most cities, the community citizens don't want their animals to just be rounded up and exterminated, for lack of better words. But I think Austin in particular maybe was quicker to jump on it because it is such an animal friendly town. Yeah. And so it was pretty easy for people to become more excited about, as we're talking about saving more animals and trying to get Austin to be no kill, businesses were coming on board because, I think that people just want that to happen naturally.
Yeah. I think I read an article where you were mentioning that you were hoping that Houston would take the mantle in terms of being the biggest city in the country with a no-kill rate. I'm not exactly sure how they're doing right now, but I would imagine your team must think a lot about how to replicate the model everywhere, or as many places, as many cities as possible. How do you go about thinking about that, and what sort of key insights do you think you've gleaned in terms of how to make that a potential reality?
We're working on that a lot. We have a program called American Pets Alive that is the sole focus, is trying to figure out how to help other communities do it. And it is not easy. We've been trying a lot of different methods. We've been trying to create Pets Alive groups in different cities. We've been trying to just share knowledge. We've tried to go in and mentor hands-on. And it just takes a lot of not hand-holding, but sort of one-on-one contact, I think, for people to finally understand how. It's really murky. And part of that is because every shelter in America is built with the same kind of the same SOPs. Yeah. And so it's this institutionalized way of thinking that is really entrenched and really old. And trying to break that is really difficult. Something we talk internally about is that the foundation of animal sheltering is really fractured. And it is not something that you can actually go in and keep adding layers to make it better and better. You kind of have to fix the whole thing. Yeah. And I'm not really sure how to do that, because every shelter ultimately is made to round up and kill animals. And so getting them to not do that you have to get down to every fine detail that happens in a shelter to try to eradicate that thinking.
And is it true that Austin Pets Alive it seems like the majority of the adoptions are dogs, but how large is the universe of potential adoption? Is it solely for dogs in the organization, or is it expanding or potentially expanding to others at some point?
The cat people on our team would be very happy you said that, because they believe that all the time. But we actually adopt out way more cats than we do dogs.
Is that right?
Yeah. So it's about 60% cats and 40% dogs.
Okay.
And they're just quieter.
For anybody listening to this who lives in town and has always wanted a dog or is interested in getting a dog at some point, I may be one of them. Or a cat. What is the process generally by which the people who do end up making those adoptions become associated with your organization here, and then at some point walk out with a new best friend?
Well, so there's a national movement, which we definitely embrace here, both at Austin Pets Alive and Austin Animal Center, is open adoptions. It's the idea that the way shelters have always treated people, because they're used to seeing people drop off animals hand over fist. And so the public becomes the enemy for a lot of shelters. And they're equating people dropping off pets with every single person in the community. And so that's another place where there's a shift in the thinking. And this open adoptions concept is that there's no necessarily like a investigation done on the person to make sure they're appropriate. It's more of a conversation. And so you're talking about what you would like in a pet, and then our people are saying, okay, well, we think we have this one that might be a good fit, or this one's not really a good fit because of X, Y, and Z, or, so it's a conversation that ultimately ends in either adopting or not adopting, but it's a welcoming environment.
And the adoption process itself, let's say an individual in our town, identifies a puppy or a dog or a cat that they're interested in adopting. How long does that process generally take? And what is the rough general price tag on actually making that happen?
So it can take a while, because on a busy Saturday, there might be 200 people here, but
200 people looking at potential adoptions. That's incredible.
And so, there's a huge community of people who love pets and want to adopt. And so keeping up with that sometimes takes a little bit longer than we'd like. And it also depends on the type of pet you're interested in. If it's an animal that has a medical condition, that you also need to go and talk to our vet team and make sure you fully understand what the pet has and what you'll need to do to manage it, then that's going to take longer than just a simple adoption. But a simple adoption, less than an hour. And
really?
Yeah, for the processing. So we recommend that everybody spend a good amount of time with the pet before they make the choice to adopt.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's for the adopter's sake as much as the pet.
Yeah. Is the price tag essentially free, or is it?
It's all over the
waivers?
place. Yeah. It's probably anywhere between, I was just looking at the city's animal code today and our fee structure today, and it's listed between $0 and $200 at the director's discretion. And that kind of is the same as ours. It depends on if we're doing an adoption special, like a big adoption weekend, and then we're doing a free event, or our normal pricing is $75 for a cat and $125 for a dog.
Okay.
But it just depends.
Yeah. Yeah. I know I was reading another statistic about the organization that was articulating just the amount of raw volunteer hours that are allocated to the organization for free. Mm-hmm. And it was some incredible number. Talk to me a little bit about that. How did this town get a zeitgeist for volunteerism for a program like this? And do you have any idea, like roughly how many volunteers are affiliated at any given time with Austin Pets Alive?
I do. And I don't know the hours right off the top of my head, but I do know that we have about 1,800 volunteers that are active, meaning that they're logging hours in the last 3 months. Okay. And so we generally have maybe 300 a month signing up. So there's a huge influx of people. Not everybody stays. There's an attrition rate that's sort of expected, but it is, I don't know. It's a fun thing to do. It's a great thing to do. It's kind of like me 20 years ago going and volunteering because I didn't know anybody. And it was a great place to sort of help make your impact on the world.
You were mentioning that on any given weekend, there could be 200 people here looking to potentially adopt. Do you ever have a problem supplying the demand, or is that really never something that's an actual problem?
No, it's funny that you asked that, because this is another area where the industry has no data about what the actual demand of a community is. And so we tend as an industry to blame slow adoptions on the community's lack of demand, but often it's because our process is onerous, or the animals we're adopting out might have needs that aren't easy to satisfy. Yeah. And so, what we're finding is that we have way more potential adopters than we have animals, and we need to figure out, we'd like to do a citywide, almost census to see if we can really put a number on what's the demand versus the supply. That would help every community.
Yeah. In terms of the day-to-day, financial running of an organization like this, is there, again, if somebody in town is listening to this and they're interested in, helping in some way, and it's not necessarily as a volunteer, but they're interested, in a financial contribution. What are the ways in which the organization is kind of reaching out to the community for those sort of donations, and where does the money generally come from? How are you able to keep this whole thing running?
Well, that's another good question. We don't have a government contract for funds. We have a government contract to be on this facility because it's city property, and that's in exchange for helping them like we have been. But we don't receive any government funding, and we have a small amount. I bet it's about 15% of our budget is covered through fees, adoption fees, and services like our thrift stores are trying to build up so that we can supply more funds, income that we can rely on every month. And then the majority of the rest is individual donors. And it's the bulk of that is made up of donors that are in the $25 to $100 range. And that's huge for us. So it kind of goes back to this grassroots movement and how we need everybody to pitch in and do a little, whether you're fostering 1 litter of kittens a year, or donating a little bit, or volunteering 5 hours a month. Every little bit adds up to a huge amount that helps to sustain the whole operation.
Yeah. And you just mentioned the fostering program, and I have a friend who's done a little bit of fostering through the APA. Talk to me a little bit about that. Is that something that, if you're not sure that a long-term pet is necessarily something that's in the near-term horizon for yourself, is that a potential option for X amount of time, maybe a month or two, to come in here and foster? Is this sort of like an open timeline in terms of how long people can adopt an animal?
So we don't typically do foster to adopt. So if somebody's interested in a specific pet, depending on what the needs of that pet are. If it's got a lot of hurdles to get over to be adopted, then of course we're going to work with that adopter who's interested. But if it's just a regular pet, then we want people to make a decision one way or the other, because we need to open that space up for another animal. And the foster program typically people who are signing up to foster, they're either people who are in a short-term situation, like a college student or somebody who's working here for a year and can't get a pet, or it's somebody who, we have people like myself who are addicted to fostering. It's just, there's a real high with being able to save their life and then get them into a home. And then there's other people who are trying to decide if they even want to be a pet owner at all. Yeah. And so it's the whole gamut. And we love all of those types of fosters because it takes a huge number. We have the largest foster program in the country. Wow. And it goes back to our community. People want to help, and it's just letting them know that there's a need and then saying yes. Okay.
I would imagine some of the animals, I think you even mentioned this or alluded to this earlier, that they may have some sort of behavioral issues or they may not be home ready at this point. Yeah. Is there some sort of a program or process that is implemented currently to curb that behavior? And if so, how does that work? We have 5 major programs that we do here, and we're not like a normal shelter. So we're not a shelter that takes in animals and our primary function is adoption, even though it looks like that from the outside. Yep. Our primary function is to take the animals that have some obstacle to living at another shelter, and then we put them through the pipelines that we've created to save their lives. So that might be little bottle baby kittens or orphan kittens that come into the shelter. If they come into most shelters in Texas and the country, they don't have a live outcome because they're too little and they need bottle feeding. They're hard to save because they're so fragile. And so we have a bottle baby program where all those kittens go through. We have a program for really sick puppies. So puppies are generally euthanized if they come in and they have symptoms of parvovirus. Even if they don't have parvo, if they have symptoms of parvovirus, they're typically euthanized along with the rest of their litter. What is parvovirus?
It's an intestinal virus that causes extreme bleeding into the intestinal tract and vomiting and diarrhea. And typically it kills 90% of puppies that get it without treatment. Okay. And we're able to save about 90% with treatment, but that is something that's never been done before in a shelter setting. So that's another group. And then we have all the injured and ill animals come through our clinic. We have an emergency center, if you will, for shelter animals. And then kind of the same thing for cats with ringworm, which is a skin fungus, like athlete's foot. Yep. No big deal, but cats die for that all over the place. And then the last program is big dogs. Big dogs in general have an obstacle to get adopted, even if they're perfectly behaved because of their size. So there's landlord restrictions. There's people are a little nervous about bringing in a larger dog. Yep. They don't know anything about. And then if they have a behavior component on top of that, either a previous history of behavior or something that they're exhibiting in the shelter, then that is even harder for them to get out alive. Yep. And so we now have a very robust behavior program, and we're focused on giving them the enrichment they need while they're here so that they don't lose their minds. And then because we know it's going to take longer for them to get adopted. And then we also have behavior modification staff members that are working and a huge volunteer corps that are working on trying to solidify good behavior that helps them get adopted too.
Gotcha. It sounds like the organization is just kicking ass right now. As you look into the future, how do you envision success looking like in 3 to 5 years? Is it sort of continuing the success that you're having right now? Is it growth? Is it figuring out the copycat for other cities? What does that look like to you?
I think that it is a constant movement upwards. I don't know where the finish line is exactly, but I think that we are trying to get a place where we have enough data that we can help other communities not have to do everything that we've done to recreate the wheel. Yep. So a lot of research to figure out what's working and what's not working here in Austin. And then also program improvement. So we're trying to get our programs, like the big dog program. Yeah. We talked about enrichment, and all the dogs get walked twice a day or they go to playgroup, but that's a very short period of their life in the kennel, 24 hours. And so we need to figure out what is it to be a dog in a shelter and have a good quality of life. Yeah. And how do we create that knowing that the shelter is not built for that. And part of that goes into, in the next 3 to 5 years, we'll be starting a capital campaign and rebuilding this facility. And our thinking is that we can build something that really does meet those needs in a way that's never been built before. Yeah.
You've probably seen thousands or tens of thousands of pets get adopted and have new lives. Is there a story or a story that you generally point to or reminisce about that, I don't know, illuminates or sheds some light on the general goals or objective of the organization that, really speaks to you individually?
Yes. I can think of one that, there's a lot, but one in particular, when you ask that question, comes to mind. This was right when we moved into this building. So maybe like 7 years ago. And we had a woman was dropping off donations. We have a lot of help from the community with tangible donations too. So like donated medications or donated food. And this woman was dropping off. Her dog had just passed away from pancreatic insufficiency, which is a really expensive treatment for owners to have to deal with their pet. She was dropping off the medications for that dog, from that dog. And that was right when we showed up with a dog that we had pulled from the city shelter with pancreatic insufficiency. And they met in the parking lot, and she adopted that dog right then and there and took her meds back.
Yeah, incredible.
I know. And that's exactly it. It's letting the community be part of every aspect of this, helping animals you'll never meet, but then also being given access to dogs and cats that most shelters don't think the public should be burdened with. There's always somebody that is interested in an animal and for their unique needs. And we shouldn't be making that decision. We should just be helping people find their soulmate. Mm-hmm.
How about for people that you see come in here that really should not be adopting? Is there a profile or a background or a situation that they come in, they speak to you or your team about wanting to adopt, and you really tell them it's now is really not the right time, or we don't think this is for the best?
Right. That's very seldom, which is great. Okay. We see, I think that there's a lot of fear and folklore about that happening in shelters. My guess is that the people who would do bad things with adopted pets won't come and give their ID to somebody. Yeah. And so I don't think we see those at least in our setting. We do often get people who just don't know what they're getting themselves into. So they might want a really difficult case to adopt. And we're like, okay, here's all the things you need to do. And they're not listening. Then we'll say, okay, you need to come back on a different day. Or if somebody's intoxicated. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why we would say no, but we try to be make it very individualized and not necessarily like a blanket process.
Gotcha. Do you know roughly what percentage of the animal, like dogs and cats in Austin, come from this organization? Is there any rough estimation as to what that number looks like? No,
there's no data out there. We know we've adopted 60,000 animals out over the last 10 years, but we don't know what that percentage is of the community's pets. Back when we started, this is the thing that really convinced me to move to rescue from prevention, was that the Veterinary Medical Association comes up with a statistic for every community where they're trying to say, this is how many pets are in your community if you want to open a veterinary practice. Yeah. And there's one stat in particular that says that there were 10 years ago, 75,000 homes every year with a pet under the age of a year. So that means that there are at least 75,000 acquisitions every year of new pets. That doesn't even include pets over a year. Yeah. And we were killing in Austin back then 14,000. So 14,000, when you compare it to that 75,000, it's kind of a ridiculously small number that you need to try to infiltrate into that 75,000. But we don't know really how many there are total.
Okay. In terms of what would really, for your long-term vision for the organization, what is the area where the community could help the most? I mean, if you could wave a magic wand and have an allocation of finances somehow, or an increase in volunteerism, what to your mind would be the best use of time and energy or money that could come from the community in some way to help?
Well, we need that every year. Yeah. So it's hard to say what the next big thing is. Every year we need to raise enough money to take care of the pets, because we're a new organization. We're only 10 years old. So we don't have this endowment. We don't have reserves that are ridiculously high. We use the money that we receive on the animals. And that happens every year. And then same thing, we have 10,000 animals a year saved. but then we need 10,000 foster homes and 10,000 adopters. So it kind of just restarts every year, needing a huge amount of help. And same with volunteers. And so our biggest need that's outside of that annual need is going to be this capital campaign and trying to really rebuild this facility. It's falling down around us. It's terrible. And it's better than death. That's why we are in here. But it's but it definitely needs to go.
When you think about yourself 10 years ago, roughly, when you started this, could you have imagined that it would have been this successful? I know that's somewhat of a leading question, but do you regard what has happened overall as a undeniable success in your mind?
I think that it has been hugely successful. There's always the little defeats that eat away at you, but I think that Austin is now the safest community in the country for dogs and cats. Yeah. And it helps me sleep at night knowing that.
Must feel amazing.
Yeah, it does. The worry, the anxiety I feel about animals it just isn't here in Austin.
Yeah.
There's anxiety about other things, but not necessarily they're going to a shelter and just being killed. So that's hugely successful. I had no idea that it was going to be such a national prominence. And so that's been sort of eye-opening that people find this so difficult to do. When we started, we really were trying to tackle that 14,000 animals that had died. And so we were trying to scale up really fast. Mm-hmm. We weren't starting as a small rescue and then the next year voting to take in another 500 animals. We were shooting to try to get up to 14,000. Yeah. Luckily, we didn't have to because of various things that happened along the way. But I think that helped to keep it in perspective from day one. Success was going to look like 90% of those animals leaving alive.
The staff that you have here, I would imagine most of the work that gets done is done by volunteers, but how big is the actual paid staff at the organization?
It is big because we have so many hands on different projects. So we have this facility, we have a facility in Terrytown, we have Petco's and PetSmarts that have our cats all over the community, including up in Williamson County. And we have the American Pets Alive arm. So we have about, I would say it's about 190 staff people, and that's including part-time and full-time. And then we have each program has a number of volunteers that is helping to offset that load. Like our orphan kitten nursery has about 20 staff people, most of them seasonal or part-time. And then we have 138 volunteers. So there's always this sort of stacking effect between what people can offer. If it's 3 hours a week from a volunteer and then maybe 15 hours a week by a staff person. We're just trying to cobble it together.
Okay. I want to ask you just a few questions about Austin specifically, since this show generally is specific to this town. How long have you now lived in town altogether?
I moved here in 1998.
98. Okay. I'm sure you, like many people who have been here for 20 plus years, have seen this totally transform itself. What are the big differences you notice now versus when you first got here or the first few years when you first lived here?
Everything. Yeah. I mean, it's really changed a lot. Yeah. It's funny. We moved down to the South Congress area because we were like, oh, this is so up and coming and it's cool. And now it's just like totally blown past us. Yeah. And now there's areas around Austin that are doing that same sort of upward climb for rent and boutique style stores and restaurants. And that's great. That's good for the economy in Austin, but it is also a little bit unsettling because kind of makes you wonder if you still fit in.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you worried with the change that kind of the zeitgeist that has brought your organization to prominence and successful change, or are you not necessarily seeing indicators of that at this point?
Say that again. Sorry.
Just with all the changes that are happening, I think Austin is still, I believe, the fastest growing major city in America. Mm-hmm. Are you concerned that the spirit of the city will change and it will affect the general success of Austin Pets Alive generally?
I worry about that a lot. And we've had a lot of leadership change at the City of Austin's Animal Services and in the City of Austin itself. And we've been working very hard to try to solidify something that makes it sustainable so that it's not up to the discretion of somebody coming in, whether it's next year or 50 years from now, that no kill is important to this town. And this is how we do it. And that's just been missing. Like I said, the how we do it part is old and out of date and is really built on the system of killing. And we need to get rid of all of that and make sure we've written down really well how we do this and that it's enforced by the director of the animal services, the city manager, and then the council. Yep. And so that's the thing that we're trying to work on now is how do we really create the sustainability that is not people dependent. Yep. Right now, I'm here. We've got other people here that are going to protect this till they die. Yep. But, I'm not going to live forever. So,
yeah. How about, just personally living here for so long, are there any, local hidden gems that, you generally think that Austin as a city just does not know about that you recommend to friends, either restaurants or bars or places to visit or go do in town that are not super well known?
Yeah, we do. We mostly restaurants and especially maybe 10 years ago, we were really following like the dive bars, the old dive bars in town. And I don't know, they probably are getting more play, but maybe not because some of them are closing down, but they're really kind of cool pieces of history in Austin because you can see on the walls what's happened over the last 100 years here. And it's really cool. It's so there's the Jenny's Little Longhorn. I think it's changed names, but that one is probably the best known of all of them. But there's so many like Deep Eddy Saloon and even let's see, I guess some of these are closed now that I'm thinking about it. Don's Depot is still there.
Love that place.
And so I've always thought if I wasn't doing this, maybe I could make a lot of money doing a dive bar tour of Austin.
How, outside of the organization and, given how much the city has changed, what does keep you here? Is it, what about the city is still appealing to you?
I love Austin. Yeah. I really do. And I think that Austinites are really good people. Yeah. I think that's a big part of it is that I'm a military brat. I've lived all over the world and it just feels really good here. People are nice to each other typically and caring and supportive. And also there's always something new that you can do. Not necessarily the new growth, but Austin is full of little hidden gems like you're talking about, some things that you never even know about. Yeah. You can be here for 20 years and never know about it. And then I think the entrepreneurial spirit of Austin also keeps me here is we know that we have a blank slate as far as research and industry standards and Austin's sort of ripe for trying to figure it out. How do we figure out what's the actual blueprint for a no-kill city? Yeah. And so that's pretty exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. I think might know the answer to this question before I ask it to you, but what would you say or what do you regard as your life's biggest accomplishment to this point?
Definitely this. Yeah. Yeah. I think that being able to be part of something like this has been really amazing.
Yeah. I would imagine when you decided to do this was not the, financially most lucrative move you could have made. If you can remember what that kind of decision point was like for you, what led you in the direction of, taking a chance and trying to start something totally new?
I had already done it with Emancipet, so I felt like I could figure out a way to make a living and still do this as a volunteer and try to grow it from the ground up. Yeah. So, that wasn't so hard. It wasn't as risky as just quitting your job and becoming homeless. I actually just worked 80 hours a week and that's how I did it. Over time, I think I just believed it would happen. So I was able to stay on course and I had a backup of a regular day job if I needed to go to it. So that was good.
Do you regard it as a calling? Like, was this something that was deep within you for many years before you actually went for it? Or how do you kind of tell yourself your own story about how you made this happen?
I don't know the answer to that. It's a calling for sure. It's something that I've always been. I think that the term that people use for kids like this is sensitive to animals. Yeah. And so that was me. And I, everything just broke my heart or breaks my heart still. I can't even watch movies about animals or read anything about animals because of that. But, So I think that sort of pushed me towards trying to make it better.
Yeah.
Like you see all these bad things happening, then what can you do what can me as a single person do to make it better?
Yeah. And the answer to this question may be similar to the one you just gave, but what advice would you give a younger you? You know, if you were talking to the 20-year-old version of yourself, what advice would you give to yourself?
I would say make every year count. You know, that it just goes fast. It goes really fast. And I find myself, I'm almost 50, and I find myself thinking, okay, what am I going to do for the next 10 years? And you only have so many 10-year revolutions before it's done.
Yeah. And does this still feel like that is the next 10 years for you?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. It does. It's a different type, but it's really, like I said, focusing on how do we make this sustainable and how do we make it replicable?
This is a question I try to ask everybody I have long conversations with. Who do you regard in your own life as the wisest person, and why?
I think probably my dad. He's incredibly intelligent and also sensitive, but he's a critical thinker. And I think that's the piece that really has helped me through my life. I remember, actually, it's funny because I remember asking him before I took on this executive director job what I should do, because the city was hiring a chief animal, a veterinarian. And so I was like, how do I make the biggest difference? Do I make it as somebody on the inside with a powerful job at the city shelter, or do I do it from the outside? And he's career military, went to the Air Force Academy, 2-star general.
Wow.
And he said, you cannot make change from the inside.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, that's my answer. I didn't even question it. It's like, okay, he knows.
Sounds like good advice in retrospect.
Yes.
The answer may be the same here, but if you can remember, if you did have a hero when you were young, who was your childhood hero, and why?
That is also a hard question. The thing that comes to mind first, which is probably common, is Joan of Arc, because of just her dying for her principles, you know?
Yeah.
I think that there's something really romantic, and especially when you're young, just, you know, knowing that somebody actually burned to death because of what they believed in. Yeah. That's pretty inspiring.
Yeah. Maybe a couple more questions and then we'll wrap this up. What is a belief or a habit that you have adopted in your life that has changed your life for the better, and why?
I think there's many, but one of the things that I made a conscious decision to change was engaging in conversation about things that I don't know.
Yeah.
And kind of the gossip angle of life. And it just doesn't do anybody any good. There's no positive that comes from that. And it wastes a lot of time. And I am a much happier person now that I just won't engage in that.
Just bypassing gossip.
Yeah. Just like, I don't engage in it.
I like that. Last question. I know you've done a bunch of interviews, I'm sure, over the years related to your work here at the organization. What is a question that you wish someone had asked you about your work here, about what happens at Austin Pets Alive, that you wish you would have asked so that you could answer, and what would your answer be?
That's a really good question. I guess the question I would ask is, and
it could be something just like a common misperception of the work that gets done here, or what the organization is, or its goals, but something that you always wanted to address, or to correct the record, or to clarify, or to give the public just general insight into what's going on here.
Probably the biggest question would be, how is this different than a regular shelter?
Yeah.
And I think that we try to do a good job at that, but I still don't think we're quite getting through.
Right.
That it looks the same as any other shelter that you walk. Of course, this one's very old, but in general, people really don't understand the amount of work that is going into the animals and the care and the potential outcomes for them. That is just, the work's it's completely unusual, which is why cities are not no-kill. Yeah. And it's also pretty advanced. And so I think that people view animal shelters as being not necessarily that innovative or that smart or that cutting edge. And we really have so much going on here. I could spend a whole day walking around the shelter and telling you all the things that we have our hands in that are really going to change the country. Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. I really appreciate your time, and I wish you totally the best with what you're doing here. I think it's an amazing organization. So congratulations.
Thank you.
And I wish you the best.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to the ATX podcast. For more information, follow the show on social media. Its handle is the ATX podcast, and on the show's website, theatxpodcast.com.